Je voudrais du soleil vert, des dentelles et des théâtres, des photos de bord de mer, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je voudrais de la lumière, comme en Nouvelle-Angleterre. Je veux changer d'atmosphère, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ma fleur, sous la pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, qu'il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Je voudrais du Fred Astaire, revoir un latte.
Had it not been for George Washington University's program on extremism, we may not have known about Christopher Hasson's alleged domestic terror plot. The Coast Guard lieutenant and self-described white nationalist was arrested last week after investigators found a cache of weapons, ammunition, and steroids in his home that investigators say he stockpiled to launch an attack targeting Democratic politicians and members of the media. A list eerily similar to people that Donald Trump routinely goes after on Twitter and in his rants to the press. It took until Friday afternoon for Trump to react to the news. And even then, Trump didn't seem to understand the effect that his language has.
When were you briefed, sir, on the Coast Guard member who was arrested for threatening Democrats and other members of the
I'm actually getting a very final briefing and a very complete briefing in about 2 hours after this.
Do you have any thoughts on this man?
I think it's a shame. Yeah, I think it's a very sad thing when a thing like that happens, and I've expressed that, but I'm actually getting a very complete briefing in about 2 hours.
Do you think that you bear any responsibility for moderating your language when it comes to that?
No, I don't. I think my language is very nice.
Joining me now is Daryl Lamont Jenkins, co-founder of the One People's Project and consulting producer on the short film Skin, which is up for an Oscar. And Malcolm Nance, executive director of the Terror Asymmetrics Project and author of The Plot to Destroy Democracy. Thank you, gentlemen. Malcolm, Christopher Hasson he worked at Coast Guard headquarters. He put out a manifesto saying he wanted to create a white homeland. He wrote to a white nationalist, a known white nationalist who's not named in the indictment. And then some of the other things he did were to go after a list of people that Trump sometimes goes after. People like our colleagues Joe Scarborough, Chris Hayes, and Ari Melber. People at CNN, Don Lemon, Chris Cuomo, Van Jones. A bunch of members of Congress. Richard Blumenthal, who Donald Trump frequently goes after. Tim Kaine, the former VP nominee. Maxine Waters, Nancy Pelosi, Kamala Harris. A lot of people are running for president. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, who's not running but is frequently a target. Ilhan Omar. So you could just go through this list of people. One of the things that was that sort of stood out was that when he went after what presumably is Elizabeth Warren, he called her Polka Warren. That's presumably her, but the polka sounds like the Pocahontas that Trump uses. Can you draw a line in an investigative sense between the rhetoric of this president and this kind of idea, this manifesto idea? Because it's also tied to something separate, which is, actually white nationalism wanting to have a white homeland.
Well, in fact, it starts out, his writings and what he was basing his ideology on was a globalist, white nationalist belief that, there should be these individual knights who will arm themselves and like Timothy McVeigh, take on the establishment of liberals themselves. And that was typified by Anders Behring Breivik, a Norwegian who mass murdered 77,000 people, one by setting off a car bomb in the middle of the capital of Norway and then killing 16 children in order to, quote unquote, eliminate the next generation of liberal leadership from Norway. This guy believed that he was going to go out and carry out a run and gun attack where he was going to kill the liberal leadership of the United States. Now, granted, it might have been a fantasy in his head. The probability of him getting away with that is about, well, it's good, but it's not zero. And that's where the problem lies. He had an ideology in his head that is based on the hatred that we are hearing every day in the United States. And it's not the first attack. We had the pipe bomber a few months ago try to do the same thing, only in a more crude fashion. This was a very, very dangerous circumstance that we have to be on guard for all the time.
Yeah, and, Daryl Jenkins, we've had right-wing extremism going all the way back to the Posse Comitatus, people in the 70s and 80s that were doing standoffs with, the IRS and refusing to pay federal taxes. This thing has come up again and again, Timothy McVeigh, et cetera. What you have now, the difference is that we haven't had a White House which is also, kind of telegraphing the kind of messaging that then gets scooped up directly and sort of quoted. New York Magazine has a piece out right now saying that Donald Trump should stop telling hateful lies that racist terrorists believe. That's the title of it. I'll read a bit of it. Regardless of whether the Coast Guard officer took inspiration from Trump, he believed in malicious fictions similar to our president spreads and saw those fictions as rationalizations for violence. I want to quickly play a version of that. Donald Trump, this is Donald Trump back in December of 2015, talking about the media, who he used as a constant attack point and still does.
By the way, I hate some of these people, but I'd never kill them. I hate them. No, these people, honestly, I'll be honest. I would never kill them. I would never do that. Let's see. No, I wouldn't. I would never kill them. But I do hate them, and some of them are such lying, disgusting people.
Daryl Von Jenkins, when people in hate groups hear that kind of rhetoric, do they take it literally? Do they take inspiration from it? What kind of rhetoric when a rhetoric from a president of the United States sounds like that, or at that point a presidential candidate, what does that do inside these movements?
Well, the fact that they are parroting what he says speaks to exactly what they do and who they are. I mean, when you see in this gentleman Hasson's writings that he is using the language that Trump is engaging in, then you know that we have an issue. But it's also not just the rhetoric. It's also not just the language. It's also the people that surrounds Donald Trump, that Donald Trump has surrounded himself with. You spoke of the person that Mr. Hasson was writing to, the white supremacist that wasn't named. So the Poverty Law Center did, in fact, confirm that it was a gentleman named Harold Covington. And Harold Covington, who passed away last summer, was a notorious white nationalist, white supremacist, who wanted to create a white ethno-state in the Pacific Northwest. Now, the reason why I bring him up is because there are gentlemen that are involved, that are supporters of Donald Trump, that we see in D.C. all the time, that's connected to folks like Roger Stone. And when you start talking about getting that close with this kind of rhetoric and this kind of hate mongering, we have ourselves a problem that we definitely need to address.
Right. And I mean, you had Steve Bannon hired by Donald Trump both to run his campaign and then brought into the White House, who said he was making Breitbart the home of the alt-right.
Exactly.
Alt-right is a term Richard Spencer, big fan of Trump, invented because it means white nationalism. So you have these kind of, the sense of access. Go ahead.
And Richard Spencer had a friend when he was at Duke University as a grad student. His name, Stephen Miller. And we see where that comes out of. See what we get out of that, I should say.
And so go ahead, Malcolm, because the question then is, Donald Trump constantly kind of attacks federal law enforcement anyway, so they're not exactly getting support from the top. And now you have this sense that these people, even if Donald Trump doesn't mean it to sound that way, they feel they have access. They feel they are now insiders. What on earth is law enforcement to do?
Well, that's a very, very good point. And that's what I wanted to talk about with regards to Donald Trump's tape. When he made those remarks, That's not dog whistle, okay? That is a siren to these people. And what he says is, I wouldn't kill the media, ... And he's leaving it up to you, the foot soldier, to go out and act as an independent actor.
It is Tuesday, the 26th of February of 2019, and you are in West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. I am your chef de cuisine, Justice Putnam, and our daily special is Tarrytown Chowder Tuesdays, a very warming, soulful dish for your soul, okay? Because this is the virtual world, and I can't really feel your stomach, so you're going to have to help me out on that end, indeed. Well, welcome to the salon here that we call the Bistro Cafe. And, well, actually, West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy in and of itself totally is a salon. And that would include the chef's table, but we're in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy as we speak. And that's what makes it a salon. So have a seat and we'll get to work here in just a moment. But let me just elucidate a little bit more on this Coast Guard lieutenant who seemed, well, the news of this Coast Guard lieutenant and his terrorism plans, how it slipped under the radar. Of course, it's not news. This kind of domestic terrorism actually is the most predominant form of terrorism. But it doesn't fit the meme of billions of microscopic brown people invading our southern border. They're microscopic, so you can't see them. But they're coming, and they're here. So when you're trying to gin up fear about that, an actual domestic terrorist targeting the very people that are have had targets put on their backs by the guy in the Oval Office. I don't mean, sure, Stephen Miller has something to do with this, but I'm talking about Trump. Okay? So mobsters got to do what mobsters do, and this is how they think the world is run. And apparently, I mean, look at Russia. I mean, that's a whole mob operation, too. And they have the GDP of Italy on a good day. A good day. I think Trump and his mob economy is really just proof that that structure, even though we suspected that politics has something to do with, mob structure, no, it doesn't. It's actually a bulwark against that kind of arbitrary capriciousness. Not to say that arbitrary capriciousness is not a part of the political process. Of course it is. But you know what I mean. Our political process actually is a bulwark against it. So how do you dismantle that bulwark? Yeah, pieces at a time. It is very interesting that every single investigator in the top echelon of the FBI and the Justice Department that had anything to do with Russia have been summarily dismissed and fired. In some cases, relocated in some bureaucratic hellhole, literally filing. That's it. Well, you know what they say. They always advance, the really good people who can file. They never get advanced because you need somebody good to file. Well, they got somebody good back there filing finally. Okay. But interesting. The dismantling of the bulwark against this mob structure that doesn't work. And it doesn't work for them either. That's what the problem is. They're nickel and dime. They're bottom feeders in every instance, even Putin. I mean, that whole economy is predicated upon bottom feeding. Oh, yeah, they got a bunch of money. Jeez. A few of them. But it's going to come back and haunt them. It always does. And so Trump's remarks are a siren call to what I think it's really weird. It's like packs and packs of lone wolves. Packs of them. Not just one pack, but packs. And they're all lone wolves, too. That's the weird part about it. And they hear that call in the full moonlight up there on the precipice. Ow! And they go for it. And they got a list. And the list is actually written out for them. Convenient, isn't it? Well, we'll get to some convenience here in just a moment because we got some stories here in the Bistro Cafe that we should get to. And what else is up in line here? Well, an ICE, that would be Immigration Customs Enforcement, ICE, the Gestapo. Well, Homeland Security is totally the Gestapo. ICE, I guess maybe they're just the SA Gestapo, the shock troops. ICE says that an infant who died when a detained immigrant went into early labor doesn't really count as a death. Really now. I think is this passive writing? I kind of lifted this from the headline. I should have cleaned this up a little bit. Detained immigrant. I think the detained immigrant was the mother of the stillborn child. Okay. I got to tell you, stillborn child, here in the States, it's a death. A North Carolina state court handed down a stunningly aggressive attack on illegal gerrymandering. Wow. Well, that's going to get overturned real soon, don't you think? Or at least contested. And talking about convenient, a Russian media executive who mocked Putin as an evil gnome. Oh, God. Why don't you just put a gun to your head, fella? Oh, they said he has conveniently committed suicide in Spain. Convenient. After the break, we move to the chef's table where Univision anchor Jorge Ramos said Venezuela is deporting he and his team of journalists out of the country after his interview with Maduro went south. Oh, and the Oracle of Omaha backtracks on Oracle, the company. Yeah, Warren says, I don't know what the hell they do. Does anybody? All that and more on West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Bon appetit. Of our homepage at netrootsradio.com, you will notice the chat room link on the right of the page, of course, monitored by Kelly Lincoln. Thank you, Kelly. To the leftish of the page, from the chat room link at the bottom of our homepage at netrootsradio.com is the contribute button. And please do become a recurring Patreon of Netroots Radio. Your recurring contribution helps us pay these bills, and we are now in need of purchasing some equipment, so need to build up that fund. And we appreciate your generosity in keeping Resistance Radio resisting as the founders originally intended. Let's see now. If you would like to follow Netroots Radio on Twitter, you can do so. Just type in at Netroots Radio. Tom takes care of that platform, and we are forever grateful that he does. Follow me on Twitter at Justice Putnam. I also post the show notes and links diary on Daily Codes about 10 minutes before showtime. I do also try to get those links up before showtime. Sometimes it's just a tad after. That's how it works sometimes. But do look for those links and show notes because it is an integral part of this whole multimedia operation indeed. Follow the show on Twitter at Cookbook West and pick up podcasts by way of Spreaker, Stitcher, TuneIn, iHeart, YouTube, iTunes, and wherever podcasts can be found. Indeed. All right. Before we dive into this first offering here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, Tarrytown Chowder Tuesdays, by the way. I'm still having my ups and downs, and you know what it's about. So I appreciate people reaching out, and ultimately, I have to get through it myself. People can say a lot of things, and with meaning and heart, but it's helpful. All right, I just never. I'm so disappointed in myself that I never fully prepared myself for this kind of experience. It goes against the whole Boy Scout in me, where you're supposed to be prepared for everything. And but who does that? I don't believe that karma is good or bad. Like, oh, that's good karma or that's bad karma. That's not what karma is. Karma just is. But because I am a Western influenced, it would feel like bad karma to prepare yourself for the death of a child. Wholly and totally, like I would be preparing myself for any catastrophe, tragedy, what have you. But I had a hard time this morning, and I'm probably having a hard time now getting going. So why don't we? This story comes out of Alternet, and it really burns my chaps, if you want to use an old-fashioned term, and I like to do that. Matthew Chapman of Alternet brings this story about a Honduran migrant woman at Port Isabel Detention Center, which is north of Brownsville, Texas. Everybody says you can't forget Texas, and I go, I know, I've tried. Went into premature labor at 27 weeks pregnant, just as ICE was processing her for release. She delivered a stillborn male infant in a joint statement by ICE and Custom Border Protection. That's the other SA Gestapo unit. The agencies seemingly went out of their way to stress their lack of responsibility for the incident. It wasn't our fault. It's your fault. Nah, it's not our fault. They didn't even say it was the other person's fault. They just said, not on our watch. No, it's not a death on our watch. Can you imagine the paperwork we have to fill out for this? Even in this new kick every brown person you can find, whether they're American citizens or not. If you click the death part, that's just extra paperwork. No one likes that. It takes away from our primary task of going out and trying to kick every brown person we can find. Oh, and just to show that we're not prejudiced or bigoted, we're just going after brown people. We go after their fellow travelers too, no matter what the color of their skin. In early December, 7-year-old Jacqueline Kale, a migrant girl from Guatemala, died of exhaustion and dehydration shortly after being taken into custody by Border Patrol agents. And that incident was followed on Christmas Eve by the death of 8-year-old Alonzo Gomez, who suffered from cough and a fever. The failure of the Trump administration to help the most vulnerable stands in stark contrast to their fanatical obsession with protecting unborn migrants. Former Office of Refugee Resettlement Director Scott Lloyd, who was recently reassigned, aggressively sought to prevent shelters and sponsors of refugee children from taking any steps to allow them to obtain abortions because there's money to be made in the adoption racket that DeVos is running. $45,000 a pop. Ian Millhiser of Think Progress brings us this next offering here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, Tarrytown Chowder Tuesdays. Well, the state court in North Carolina has ruled that people who steal elections should not be rewarded for their theft. I wonder about that. Will Mark Harris go to jail? We'll see. This doesn't have much to do with Mark Harris. But it is a court ruling. Now, the perennial problem in gerrymandering cases is that even when an illegal map is eventually struck down by the courts, the state will often administer one or more elections using the deficient map before the courts can intervene. Now, let me just say quickly what Mark Harris did in terms of election fraud is different than the gerrymandering scam. But this is all part of a whole. If you steal an election, should you be able to reap the fruits of that theft? And if you're caught, do you get to try to steal it again? Come on. Well, when before courts can intervene and folks are using the deficient gerrymandering maps for several election cycles, that's benefiting from the fruits of a theft. It means illegally elected lawmakers will make new laws, sometimes for years. It also means partisans have little incentive not to gerrymander because their illegal maps are likely to be in effect for at least one election. Well, on Friday, a North Carolina state court offered a radical and creative solution to this problem, invalidating two state constitutional amendments that were proposed by an illegal gerrymandered legislature after the state's legislative maps were invalidated. But before a new election could remove lawmakers in gerrymandered seats from office. The case is North Carolina State Conference of the NAACP v. Moore. Under the North Carolina Constitution, the state legislature may propose constitutional amendments with a 3/5 supermajority vote in both chambers. Such proposed amendments must then be ratified by a majority of the voters. In June of 2018, about a year after the Supreme Court affirmed a lower court decision, striking down many of North Carolina's legislative districts as unconstitutional racial gerrymanders, state lawmakers proposed 6 amendments to the state's constitution. 2 of those amendments, a cap on income taxation and a voter ID requirement, were later ratified by voters. In his opinion, striking down these amendments, Judge G. Brian Collins reasons that an illegal gerrymandered legislature cannot propose an amendment, at least after the state's legislative maps were declared invalid by the Supreme Court of the United States. The state constitution, Collins notes, provides that the people of this state have the inherent sole and exclusive right of regulating the internal government and of altering or abolishing their constitution and form of government. Yet when the Supreme Court determined that the state's legislative maps are invalid, the state's General Assembly lost its claim to popular sovereignty. The unconstitutional racial gerrymander, Judge Collins reasoned, tainted the 3/5 majorities required by the state constitution before an amendment proposal can be submitted to the people for a vote, breaking the requisite chain of popular sovereignty between North Carolina citizens and their representatives. Judge Collins' opinion is brief, but it appears to apply only to state constitutional amendments proposed after the state's legislative maps are struck down. Ordinary legislation would likely survive under Collins' reasoning. In that sense, Collins strikes a balance between the need for the state to be able to conduct business and the need to ensure that an illegal majority in the state legislature does not enact laws which cannot be easily repealed by a future legislature. Well, it remains to be seen whether Collins' opinion survives contact with higher courts. Do you think? Now, while opinions like Collins are rare, Judge Collins also addressed a very real problem in gerrymandering cases. Without protections against lawmaking by legislatures who owe their jobs to an illegal gerrymander, those legislators have every incentive to enact illegal maps and then ride them out on as many elections as possible before a court intervenes.
Je te donne ce mon amour pour la vie entière, la promesse de me trouver à tes genoux. Aussitôt que tu m'appelles, rester toujours fidèle, c'est tout, c'est tout. Je te donne tous mes printemps, mes étés de mer, mes automnes quand les feuilles tombent partout. Si ce n'est pas une bonne affaire, je te donne tous mes hivers, c'est tout.
Travis Geddes of Raw Story brings us this final offering here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Well, it's another one of these convenient little things that happen conveniently all the time whenever Putin's tied into it. And even when they say that Putin isn't tied into it, eventually it turns out that he was. Julia Davis, a prominent, I got to tell you, a prominent Russian reporter brought this to Travis Geddes' attention through a tweet yesterday. A prominent Russian media executive and political consultant has died in Spain. Igor Malyshenko, co-founder and president of the independent NTV channel, was reported dead at age 64. And what's funny is that he was pretty darn healthy. And the cause of death was reported by the Russian media as suicide, according to the English-language Moscow Times. Mashenko joined Boris Yeltsin's infamous presidential campaign in '96 after co-founding NTV with a group of leading journalists and later headed other media projects. Last year, Malyshenko oversaw Ksenia Sobchak's presidential campaign. Sobchak posted on her Telegram channel, Igor Malyshenko has killed himself. I can't pull myself together. I am grateful to him for our joint work on the presidential campaign. I saw him as very proper and a very creative person. I'm proud he headed my campaign. Other reports have come out that there was really no sign of depression. And this comes out of the blue, very much like the convenient fatal muggings, the convenient fatal heart attacks, the convenient polonium poisonings, and the ever-popular convenient 5-story fall, moving a piano that you don't own into a condo that you don't live in. Conveniently. All right, let's get to our break. And when we come back from that break, I got to tell you, we had weather yesterday. So when I say weather, I mean weather. And there's also a lot of weather from around the world. And then after that, we're going to go through the stories that we've curated for you today. You are listening to West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, and we will be right back.
You are listening to netrootsradio.com.
Please hang up and try again.
From a point at sea to the circles of your mind, a new force is at work for planetary transformation. New radio for a new Earth.
This is Take Two Movie Review. I'm Clinton Johnston. This week, she gives you her heart. 20th Century Fox has just given us Robert Rodriguez's Alita Battle Angel. It comes from a 1990-95 manga series by Kishiro Yukito named Gun Dream. Gun Dream starts with a roboticist in a post-apocalyptic future who finds the head of a young female cyborg. He revives her and names her Alita. She cannot remember her past identity, but she can remember a legendary school of martial arts. Becoming a bounty hunter, she struggles between her desire to defend the defenseless and the bloodlust she experiences while doing so. The series was renamed Battle Angel Alita in its English translation and became a classic, and of course, James Cameron liked it. Of course he liked it, secured the rights, and has been sitting on those rights forever because Alita falls right in line with James Cameron's female characters. Lindsey Brigham in The Abyss, Ridley in Aliens, Sarah Connor in Terminator 2. Cameron likes warrior women, especially if they have non-traditional female exteriors but are driven by traditionally feminine motives, a romantic pursuit or maternal instinct. If you'll forgive me, I wonder if these characters reflect how Cameron sees himself. He says he thinks himself an innately nice guy, yet other people have described him as an ambitious, short-fused, willful, obsessive, and controlling dick. The crew on The Abyss famously made up t-shirts for themselves that said, "You can't scare me, I work for James Cameron." This dickishness is why I'm glad that Cameron has set up Alita Battle Angel, but Rodriguez has brought it home. Sometimes Cameron films are like really old chocolates, and yes, I know he's responsible for the top-grossing romance movie of all time, but sometimes for me, it's hard to get to his film's sweet, soft, gooey center. But Rodriguez believes that science fiction blockbusters fail when they become so far out they cease to be relatable. Yes, Weta from Avatar does peerless motion capture of Rosa Salazar's cool performance, but it's Rodriguez making sure that, like the movie's main character, all its technical brilliance sits around a powerful beating heart. This has been Take Two Movie Review. I'm Clinton Johnston. Catch up with us at TakeTwoMovieReview.com and feed us back on our page on YouTube.
This is Scientific American's 60-Second Science. I'm Karen Hopkin. Living with your parents has its benefits, at least when it comes to raising your kids. They are grandkids. Because 2 new studies add to the evidence that grandmothers can enhance the survival of grandchildren. That is, unless grandma's too old or lives too far away. The results appear in the journal Current Biology. Humans are unusual in that the females live long past the age at which they stop having babies.
We don't really see that in nature. Most of the organisms will reproduce up to their very last moment.
Patrick Bergeon, professor of biology at Bishop's University in Quebec. This increase in post-reproductive longevity is often explained by the so-called grandmother effect.
Because family members share their genes, there could still be a benefit for postmenopausal women to increase their genetic footprint by helping their daughters to rear larger families.
To explore the grandmother effect hypothesis, Bergeon and his colleagues examined nearly 200 years' worth of French-Canadian population records from the 17th and 18th centuries.
At the time, life was tough. In some years, 1/3 of the kids were not even making it to 1 year of age.
But the researchers found that having a grandmother still alive was a definite plus.
Families with grandmothers alive were larger by about 2, and the survival of these grandchildren to age 15 was much improved.
This beneficial effect was only seen when the matriarchs lived nearby, which suggests that grandmothers help by playing an active role in their grandchildren's lives. Unfortunately, that role's tougher for them to fulfill as they get older, which brings us to the second study. Researchers at the University of Turku in Finland used church records from the 18th and 19th centuries. They found that the benefits associated with having a grandmother on hand depended on her age. Once Nana hit 75, the grandchild's survival benefit disappeared, and then some.
In other words, it was better for grandchildren to have no living grandmother at all than it was to live with an older one or one who was in poorer health.
Simon Chapman, a doctoral student in biology.
This was almost certainly due to some form of indirect resource competition, though, rather than wickedness on the part of co-resident grandmothers.
So, a healthy grandma helps make for a healthy grandchild. If over the river and through the woods to grandmother's house isn't too long a trip. Thanks for listening. For Scientific American's 60-Second Science, I'm Karen Hopkin.
Sweetie, want some fruit? You have to use the right tool for the job. A power drill is the wrong tool to slice fruit. Just like an antibiotic is the wrong tool to treat viruses, including colds and flu. Antibiotics are only needed for certain bacterial infections. When they aren't needed, antibiotics won't help you, and the side effects could still hurt you. Ask your healthcare professional when an antibiotic is the right tool and when it's not. Visit cdc.gov/antibiotic-use.
Hi, I'm Tom Hartman, and since you're listening to netrootsradio.com, show your progressive side and go to the donate button on the bottom of the homepage. It's progressives like you who power Netroots Radio and keep the progressive message beaming everywhere 24 hours a day. Just go to our donate button at the bottom of netrootsradio.com. Thank you for for keeping Progressive Radio at full power.
It's time for Nicole Sandler's What's News from NicoleSandler.com and the Progressive Voices Network.
It's a busy, split-screen kind of week, starting with Donald Trump in Vietnam, bone spurs and all, for his second summit with Kim Jong-un.
I have a very, very good relationship with Kim Jong-un. Very, very good. We have a special feeling, and I think it's going to lead to something very good.
In a meeting with the country's governors, the president laid out the U.S.'s goal that North Korea get rid of its nuclear weapons without defining exactly what that looks like, while also appearing to tamp down expectations.
I'm not in a rush. I don't want to rush anybody. I just don't want testing. As long as there's no testing, we're happy.
A far cry from his position following the first summit last June.
It will be a total denuclearization, which is already starting.
The president had gone even further in a tweet saying, quote, "There is no longer a nuclear threat from North Korea." But Secretary of State Mike Pompeo told Jake on State of the Union that's just not true.
Do you think North Korea remains a nuclear threat? Yes. But the president said he doesn't.
It's not what he said. I know precisely.
He tweeted
what he said.
there is no longer a nuclear threat from North Korea.
Right. What he said is that the efforts that had been made in Singapore, this commitment that Chairman Kim made, have substantially taken down the risk to the American people.
As the talks play out, key events in Congress could distract from the president's summit, including Trump's former personal attorney Michael Cohen testifying before Congress 3 times, privately and publicly.
Immigrants are welcome here.
And the House will vote Tuesday to block the president's national emergency declaration for the border wall.
If you don't have it, you're not going to have borders. You're not going to have a country pretty soon.
58 former senior national security officials see it differently, signing on to a scathing bipartisan letter admonishing the president's declaration.
The House on Tuesday is voting on a resolution to block Donald Trump's controversial national emergency declaration at the southern border. The legislation already has enough co-sponsors to pass, 230, including one Republican, Justin Amash. Once it passes the House, it moves to the Senate, where it seems only one more Republican vote is needed. Tom Tillis announced in a Washington Post op-ed on Monday that, quote, "As a U.S. Senator, I cannot justify providing the executive with more ways to bypass Congress." Susan Collins and Lisa Murkowski had already signaled that they're on board. One more Republican defector would allow the bill to pass, sending it to Trump's desk, where it's believed he'd issue his first presidential veto. Michael Cohen begins 3 days of testimony on Capitol Hill Tuesday with a closed session at the Senate Intelligence Committee. On Wednesday, we all get to watch as Cohen appears before an open session of the House Oversight Committee. And then on Thursday, he's back behind closed doors again to testify before the House Intelligence Committee. A TV news crew from Univision was reportedly detained in Caracas, Venezuela on Monday after anchor Jorge Ramos asked Nicolas Maduro questions he didn't like and showed him a video of people eating from the trash. They were released after about 3 hours, but their equipment and videotape was confiscated. Authorities informed them they'd be deported on Tuesday. As if things aren't shaky enough in Venezuela, let me direct you toward the border between India and Pakistan, where things are heating up between the two nuclear rivals. Earlier this month, a suicide car bomb attack in Kashmir killed 40 Indian soldiers. India blamed Pakistan and then launched airstrikes on an alleged terrorist training camp across the border. Kashmir has been bitterly contested by India and Pakistan since the partition of the two countries in 1947, leading to 3 wars and numerous skirmishes. Colorado's new governor, Jared Polis, will sign a measure to award his state's electoral votes to the winner of the national popular vote. Colorado will become the 12th state to join the National Popular Vote Interstate Compact. These 12 states and the District of Columbia, which has also passed a popular vote bill, account for 181 electoral votes, just under 90 shy of the 270 votes a presidential candidate needs to win the White House. So the compact won't go into effect until the coalition includes states that add up to 270 electoral votes or more. Once it does go into effect, states that are part of the coalition would award their electoral votes en masse to the candidate who wins the national popular vote. The White House plans to create an ad hoc group of select federal scientists to reassess the government's analysis of climate science and counter conclusions that the continued burning of fossil fuels is harming the planet, this according to 3 senior administration officials. The National Security Council initiative would include scientists who question the severity of climate impacts and the extent to which humans contribute to the problem. Wisconsin Governor Tony Evers issued an executive order withdrawing more than 110 Wisconsin National Guard soldiers and aviators from Arizona, saying there was no justification for stationing troops at the U.S.-Mexico border. And finally, voters in Chicago head to the polls Tuesday to pick a new mayor to replace Rahm Emanuel, who isn't seeking re-election. The field of candidates is large, 14 people, so there will likely be a runoff. And that's a bit of what's news for now. I'm Nicole Sandler. If you appreciate these reports and the Nicole Sandler Show, I hope you'll consider making a contribution. My work is 100% listener supported, and I can't do it without your help. Find out more at NicoleSandler.com/donate.
From UN headquarters, I'm Luke Vargas with your World in 2 Minutes. The U.S. asked countries on Monday to do more to help dislodge Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro from power, including freezing assets of Venezuela's state oil company and denying visas to members of Maduro's inner circle. That call came days after Maduro blocked American aid deliveries into the country, an act that opposition leaders, including self-declared interim president Juan Guaido, hope paints Maduro as insensitive to the plight of his people. Addressing regional leaders in Bogota, Colombia, Vice President Mike Pence said he remained confident Venezuela was continuing its journey to freedom, but he said Guaido needs as much help as he can get.
We urge you to transfer ownership of Venezuelan assets in your country from the Maduro's henchmen to President Guaido's government, and to do so immediately.
The U.S. sanctioned Venezuela's state oil firm in January and ordered the firm's profits, including those of its American subsidiary Citgo, be held in reserve until the money be transferred to Guaido and his appointed officials. But not everyone is on board with the U.S. pressure campaign. Mexico, under President Juan Manuel López Obrador, has notably joined the likes of Cuba, Turkey, and Russia in standing by Maduro and refusing to join calls for new Venezuelan elections.
There can be no bystanders in Venezuela's struggle for freedom. To those nations that have been supporting the Maduro regime, in the wake of the brutality that the world witnessed this weekend, we urge you to reconsider.
But even as Pence made that appeal, he suggested a force even more powerful than the United States was watching to see how countries respond to the Venezuelan crisis.
To the good people of Venezuela, seek your freedom. We will go with you. You go with God. Vayan con Dios.
Luke Vargas, the United Nations.
Thank you for accompanying us here to the Chef's Table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, Tarrytown Chowder Tuesdays. We always begin weather from around the world along the banks of the Rogue River in the Rogue River Valley of Southern Oregon on the west coast of the continental United States of America, where it is currently 32 degrees. And we are under a winter weather advisory. We had slushy snow falling yesterday, and it looks like we're going to be getting about 1.5 inches of rain and snow today. We were under a flood watch yesterday. I think that has abated, though many areas remain flooded. Some people are still isolated because bridges have been washed over, not washed out, But creek beds have risen so high that bridges are being overflowed and cars can't get across. So people are trapped still, though, as I say, I think the flood watch has, that's been taken down and some flooding has been abated. But now we have more rain today. Looks like we're going to get more than a half an inch tomorrow of rain. And then we're supposed to get a half an inch of rain tonight. And then another half inch tomorrow. Wow. Winds are light and variable out of the south-southwest, will remain light and variable until tonight. They will remain out of the south-southwest, but pick up at 5 to 10 miles per hour and continue at that rate through tomorrow. And we have winter weather mix for the rest of the week forecast. Right now, pollen is rated as none. The air quality index is good at 14 parts per million. And the daytime UV index is now ticked down into the low green range at 2. Barometric pressure is holding steady right now at 29.63 inches. Visibility is up to 9 miles. And relative humidity is 91%. Oh, my. Weather from around the world is brought to you by people's personal weather stations that they purchased. These people planted these purchased personal weather stations somewhere on their property. And these people positively live around the world. London is 66 and sunny. Paris is 67 and sunny. Rome is 57 and partly cloudy. Kiev is 34 degrees and cloudy. Kabul is 22 and clear. Hong Kong is 64 and mostly cloudy. Tokyo is 47 and partly cloudy. Sydney, Australia is 69 and mostly cloudy. San Francisco, California is 53 degrees with rain and wind, and they have a gale watch. That's like 60 mile per hour winds. Get out of the way. And New York is 31 degrees Fahrenheit, sunny with their own weather advisory, and yes, it too has a small craft advisory, though not gale force winds, but brisk enough that you might want to take care out there in the waterways around New York. And that is weather from around the world, brought to you by people's personal weather stations that they purchased. These people planted these purchased personal weather stations somewhere on their property, and these people positively live around the world. Carlos Garcia Rollins and Sarah Marsh of Reuters brings us this first amuse-bouche here at the Chef's Table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Dateline Caracas. U.S. television network Univision said yesterday, Monday, that Venezuela was deporting a news team led by anchor Jorge Ramos after they were briefly detained at the presidential palace because their line of questioning upset President Nicolas Maduro. The 6-person team was held for more than 2 hours in the Miraflores Palace after Maduro said he did not like their questions. Ramos told reporters after arriving back at his Caracas hotel, which was surrounded by armed intelligence agents. Venezuela's socialist government has long had a tense relationship with Western media, which it largely considers hostile and in league with imperialist interests. Well, of course they are. But did you notice that Jorge Ramos was kicked out of early on in Trump's campaign? Trump didn't like that at all. I mean, yeah, that big guy, Sleekster, took him right out. And seemed like a Banana Republic move at the time, and it looks like it is. Short detentions and deportations have become common, especially as reporters facing delays for official permission to seek shortcuts to report in Venezuela. That has come into the spotlight over the past month as Maduro faces his biggest political challenge since he replaced Hugo Chavez 6 years ago. Wow, it's been 6 years already? And dozens of countries recognizing his rival Juan Guaido as the country's legitimate leader. And that's why we're down there stirring up stuff. At least 7 foreign journalists who flew in to cover the turmoil were briefly detained in January. Ramos, a veteran anchor born in Mexico, said he had asked Maduro about the lack of democracy in Venezuela, the torture of political prisoners, and the country's humanitarian crisis. And the president then stopped the interview after being shown a video of young Venezuelans eating from a garbage truck. They confiscated all our equipment, Ramos told Univision in the interview. They have the interview. Ramos said authorities had informed his team they would be deported today and had to be at the airport at, 7 a.m. Eastern Time. He said they were scheduled to leave on a midday flight to Miami. Information Minister Jorge Rodriguez said on Twitter the government had in the past welcomed hundreds of journalists to the Miraflores presidential palace, but it did not support cheap shows put on with the help of the U.S. State Department. And I don't think Jorge Ramos is roaming the halls of the State Department, even as a reporter, let alone as an asset. Not in this administration, please. Spanish language Univision and the U.S. State Department had called on Maduro to release the journalists after Ramos rang the network to say they had been detained. Rang, that sounds like a British term. These people who wrote this must be British. Or they took British English. Rang. Yeah, next thing you know, they're going to be pushing a pram. News of their detention and confiscation of their equipment by Maduro's henchmen are the latest reminder that press freedom in Venezuela applies only to those who are willing to spread the regime's lies. Kimberly Breyer, Assistant Secretary of State for Western Hemisphere, said. Mexico's Foreign Minister Marcelo Ebrard also tweeted his government's protests at the events.
Je te donne ce mon amour pour la vie entière. La promesse de me trouver à tes genoux. Aussitôt que tu m'appelles, rester toujours fidèle. C'est tout, c'est tout. Je te donne tous mes printemps, mes étés de mer, mes automnes quand les feuilles tombent partout. Si ce n'est pas une bonne affaire, je te donne tous mes hivers, c'est tout.
Jonathan Stemple, also of Reuters, brings us this final amuse-bouche here at the chef's table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. The Oracle of Omaha, Warren Buffett, admitted he knew less than he thought about Oracle Corp, the company overseen by fellow billionaire Larry Ellison. I need to, in just the interest of fair reporting, in my incarnation as a professional chef, I routinely handled the chefing duties when the Oracle crew, along with Larry Ellison, would come upon our yachts and we would ply the Bay Area waters, and they would get a very fine dining experience. And before I ever, I'd heard of Larry Ellison, but I didn't really pay attention. And he had talked to me a couple of times. I thought he was just somebody, who worked for Oracle. And he does, kind of. But he kept asking for me to come back. So, Larry for some reason liked me. And I wondered if, maybe I'm not going to heaven now. Investors were flummoxed earlier this month when Buffett's company revealed that during last year's fourth quarter, it had exited a $2.13 billion stake in Oracle that it had taken the prior quarter. What was shocking was that Buffett doesn't do that. He's in for the long haul, and to get out so quickly is really unusual. Now, he said he thought that Ellison's doing a fantastic job. Well, of course. But he said after he started buying it, he didn't understand the business, particularly after his experience with IBM. He said, I don't think I understand exactly where the cloud is going. Well, the cloud is going where the winds push it, Warren. And I think that's why Warren's a little concerned, because the winds of change may not be blowing it into a nice place, would it? Warren knows. And I guess we should take heed. All right, that brings us to the end of our broadcast period for the day. And you know that Netroots Radio is going to broadcast on. We'll meet up tomorrow for Smothered Benedict Wednesdays. So do stay tuned to Netroots Radio all day and all night for all the breaking news as it breaks. And we'll meet up here tomorrow, right here on West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Bon appetit.
Je voudrais du soleil vert, des dentelles et des théâtres, des photos de bord de mer, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je voudrais de la lumière, comme en Nouvelle-Angleterre. Je veux changer d'atmosphère, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ma fleur sous la pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Je voudrais du Fred Astaire, revoir un latte Goël. Je voudrais toujours te plaire dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je veux déjeuner par terre, comme au long de golfe clair, t'embrasser les yeux ouverts dans mon jardin d'hiver. De novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Ba-da-da-dum-di-da-dum. 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 Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ba-da-da-dum-di-da-dum. 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 Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Dans mon jardin d'hiver.